Microdema here. Be a warrior, not a worrier. I'm going to read another chapter from my first novel, Melchizedek, Kings and Priests, by Michael Cordima. You can find it on Amazon under my name, and also the sequel. You can also go to melchizedeknovel.com to see all the other versions and places that it's for sale, including the form of audiobooks and digital versions on Kindle and Nook, etc. So I'm wearing a shirt made by Alley Cat's Tees. Look at my description really quick for the exact wording of that. And she has stuff on Facebook and a website of her own. And so check them out. She made this custom for me. This is based on a design from a description in my novel in this particular chapter. I'm also wearing my God is First. That's one ST. So God is First. You can go to godisfirst.com to check out the apparel there. There's high quality stuff. It's affordable. It's really great. And I'm sure they'd appreciate it if you'd let them know I sent them to you. So we're going to be in chapter 1 tonight. Chapter 1 of Melchizedek, Kings and Priests. So it starts off with some scripture from Deuteronomy. Then Moses set apart 3 cities beyond the Jordan toward the sunrise, that the manslayer might flee there, who kills his neighbor unintentionally and didn't hate him in the time past, and that fleeing to one of these cities he might live. Deuteronomy 4:41-42. Chapter 1. I-5 corridor, north of SeaTac International Airport, Seattle, Washington, Friday, March 25th, 8:19 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. A strong gust of cool wind that originated from the Puget Sound blew eastward through the city and over the highway, dissipating the latest round of tear gas. As the smoke cleared, the chaos and confusion that was prevailing just north of the Seattle-Tacoma Airport came into focus for a third party who was watching astutely from the sidelines. Feeling like he was late for a party he wasn't invited to, Jerry Farron stood atop a rusted-out, abandoned van that was parked on the side of a road that ran parallel to the interstate in the south end of Seattle's industrial district. He was shivering slightly, wearing only a pair of jeans and a t-shirt despite the cold morning air, but was too distracted by his quarry to notice. With some assistance from an augmented reality lens in his right eye, he could see virtually everything that was happening on the highway. The lens was synced to a drone that was hovering some 60 feet above the burgeoning confrontation. With a critical expression on his face, he looked over the progress that the various groups involved had made since his arrival. The purpose of the protest was nothing new. Every year the unions organized and came out in an attempt to attract media attention to the most recent round of layoffs caused by advancements in artificial intelligence and robotic automation. In their latest effort, they had joined up with the most recent iterations of a variety of social rights and other advocacy groups. Each had their own reasons for being there, and together they made a formidable force, which was good news for him, as it meant the authorities would be too busy to notice his presence. Omni, focus zoom, 20%, he thought to himself. A new window appeared in the display that was projected onto the lens. Included within was an even closer look at the action. Able to see the players in more detail, Jerry made out the easily identifiable red and pink armbands of the true Bolsheviks, who appeared to be taking the lead. They were marching north ahead of the others toward a series of wooden and plastic barricades that had been set up by the local police. The officers stood dutifully behind them in riot gear, their unyielding forms standing ready to stop any advance on their position. Not far behind the true Bolsheviks' main force, 4 or 5 union groups that had scattered when the last volley of gas canisters were fired on their position started to regroup. Their numbers were smaller than those of their successors when counted all together, but they were better armed, most having come to the occasion wielding chains, wooden planks, and other varied blunt instruments in their hands. They shared their positions with the local chapter of the Democratic Socialist Republican Party, otherwise known as the DSR, their members wearing bright blue sashes or bandanas somewhere on their person in a vain effort to separate themselves from the others, keeping up the facade of being the only group in the conflict that cared about the people. The DSR was currently in the process of removing any who had been affected by the tear gas, while the true Bolsheviks provided medical attention for any that had been injured or burned in the most recent face-off using converted medical vans to the south. In general, the rioters appeared to be more organized than previous times Jerry had been sent out to report on their activities, and were no longer in the unruly, chaotic mob he had become accustomed to seeing when they started their yearly round of protests each spring. They were still a ramshackle group, to be sure, but also appeared to be much more coordinated than they had been in previous years, and the day was still young. Noticing how aggressive they were as well, Jerry supposed that the protesters who did not appreciate violence had been sent into the city center for the time being, where the majority of activist groups usually congregated with their picket signs and amplifiers, so those who lived and worked downtown could see their quippy catchphrases and hear their endless speeches. The riot has been going on since rush hour last night, which means some of the protesters haven't gotten any sleep yet, Jerry thought to himself. Maybe it will burn out by evening, like the one that happened last fall. But these thoughts did not comfort him. It was still only 7 a.m., and things were different. America was under new management, one the people had not elected. He let out a sigh and looked on in disbelief as his breath hung in the air for a moment in the morning cold. Well, at least it's not raining, he said to himself out loud. He'd been watching the situation unfold since daybreak, not only using the omniglass lens to scout out the event and record its progress, but to tap into some of the hundreds of publicly streamed real-time news reports available to him, as well as which allowed him to see every part of the engagement as it was happening from multiple points of view. He wasn't there to gawk at it like some spectator, though, or to report on the riot, even if that was his usual role. When the tear gas had blown away completely, he saw his opening. It was time to head for the highway. There was money to be made. Do you see that? A small female voice reverberated through his cranium. Yeah, I see it, he responded. I'm heading in. Have you spotted me yet? Wait a sec. Yeah, I see you. Blue jeans and... Are you wearing a white shirt? Are you trying to draw attention to yourself? The voice sounded irritated. Jerry looked down at himself. She was right. Hold on. He reached down to the bottom of the right side of his untucked t-shirt and felt along its bottom edge until his fingers found a concealed button that was sewn into the seam. He pressed it 3 times, changing his shirt from white to blue, then red, then finally black. Flat black, she said. You can't do better than flat black? Not knowing which of the multitude of drones that were flying around the area she was watching him from, he simply looked up in the general direction of the highway and raised an eyebrow. Look, Fashion Gestapo fine, he said, and pushed a second button that was next to the first, each press causing an image or slogan of some kind to appear on the front of or around his torso. He cycled through several of the available options, which ranged from reasonably playful to outright insulting, before finally stopping on one that resonated with him. It appeared in large red block letters over the dark fabric, spelling the words, "Do you." Better? He said, lifting up his arms. Much. You'll fit right in. Jerry took off a lightweight backpack he had brought with him and set it down next to his right foot. Out from it he took a dark blue towel and a water bottle. He poured some water onto the towel and wrapped it around his head, covering his mouth and nose, and tied it tightly behind his neck. Hope this holds, he thought. Didn't have time to get a cheap mask and can't blend in with my expensive one, so this will have to do. He reached into the backpack again, took out an expensive-looking pair of sunglasses and put them on. He focused his thoughts into another command. Omni, sync to Protomark glasses and bring up structural outlines. The interface in his lens vanished and reappeared in both lenses of the glasses, giving the interface a deeper and larger space to work with. Through the glasses, he could see the orange outlines of several burning vehicles that had been moved onto the highway by the protesters earlier that morning, and people marching toward them through the smoke. Behind the burning cars, more outlines revealed information about the surrounding buildings, along with their entrances and exits. Handy information to have should he need to make a quick getaway or find somewhere to hide or lay low for a few minutes. The augmented data being fed through his lens and into the glasses also revealed the structure of the highway itself. At the moment, it looked as if the Union members were finished regrouping and were about to make another charge. Jerry planned to be with them when they did. "Are you sure you can't get IDs from the drone feed?" he asked. Several seconds passed before he received a response. "No, the smoke from the cars they set on fire in the northbound lanes is blocking my view. We knew this would happen. The same thing happened last year, and we missed our opportunity. That's why Tom asked you to go there. We need to know who the leaders are this time around before they get arrested. They can't be the same organizers of the last riot because all of them are either in jail or out of the country. They have to be on the highway because no leaders have shown up to speak downtown yet. They aren't gathering peacefully this time either. Some of the protesters have started looting and setting fires to street level businesses there. No one knows who put this together yet, and we could really make out well by selling anything you can record that has their faces in it. But we need it now. And how am I supposed to know who they are? You know the answer to that, Jerry. Don't joke around. Just take the time to look at anyone barking orders, organizing anything, or taking shelter behind the others while still trying to look important." Jerry looked northeast. No longer using the feed from the drone, he focused his thoughts again. Omni outlined people who are wearing helmets with visors in blue. Multiple figures that were standing on the northbound side of the highway changed from orange to blue in his vision. Their outlines indicated that most of them were carrying riot shields, obviously the local police force. There must have been 200 or 300 of them. The protesters, estimated to have been around the same in number earlier that morning, were growing in their ranks. They could just turn south and head toward the ramps that led to the airport terminals, essentially stopping all transportation in and out of SeaTac. But they seemed content for the time being, drumming up attention in the news by lighting the interstate on fire, perhaps with the hope that by doing so, more people might show up and join their cause. The cold wind began to pick up again, pushing its way through the nearby buildings. He raised an arm up to block the harsh breeze, turning his face away from it, just long enough to notice how the rays of the sun seemed to sparkle off the tall skyscrapers to the north. It was still rising, and for a few seconds the reflection of the eastern skyline made against their nearly flawless surfaces made it appear as if there were two great balls of flame in opposition to one another, destined to eventually meet somewhere far above the rest of the world. But of course, one of them was an illusion, and would soon vanish, long before the real McCoy would reach its zenith. He was glad he'd put on the glasses, as he might have been blinded by the bright visage, but also noticed that in the light of day, the newer structures that were erected after the calamity looked nothing like they did at night. Seeing the Cascade Mountains and the reflection of the giant mirror that was downtown Seattle, he also realized that he hadn't been this far out of the city center for a while. He found himself staring at the sheer beauty of the sight, the stark contrast of the tall, pristine pillars standing behind the run-down section of the city where he stood, as if Seattle were some mystical place full of justice and beauty. But of course, he knew the truth. "What are you doing? Go now," the voice yelled at him. "Sorry, on my way," he said. He climbed down from the van and crossed the street to the parking lot where he had had a taxi drop him off. It had taken some work to find the right wording so that the connected automated vehicle would leave him where there was no formal address, but he'd managed. Apparently saying, "Let me out now or I'll sue," a few times in a row was a back door to getting a cab to let someone out anywhere. He was not unfamiliar with the place he'd made the cab stop, having trespassed through that particular parking lot before. He'd used the same route several times to reach the highway whenever he needed to report on a situation developing near SeaTac, be it hostage or terrorist related, or one of many protests like the one he was about to go into, usually designed to get attention for one cause or another, or to force a local politician's hand on some issue in exchange for getting traffic to the airport going again. The van he was standing on was located across the street from a fenced-in storage lot on Airport Way that was owned by a small shipping company called Aloha Freight Services, LLC. The lot was full of shipping containers, old machinery, and any number of types of transportable materials typically used for a wide variety of construction projects, many of which had been there for years waiting for an industrious buyer to come along and utilize them for some grand project, but no one had come. A few years earlier, he'd found a route behind and through the long rows of forklifts and piles of scrap metal that allowed him to avoid the one solitary security camera which overlooked the entire lot while doing a report on thefts in the area. During an interview, he was allowed to see videos recorded by the security cameras that monitored the property. Remembering at the time that he wasn't far from the place where the interstate protests most frequently occurred, he noticed that the top corner of a large steel cargo container, which was well worn by the elements of this and surrounded by tall grass, had been placed close to the highway and concealed a portion of the fence which he could climb over without being seen. After navigating his way through the lot, he climbed the fence and began to make his way up the grassy shoulder of the highway to the southbound CAV dedicated lane that ran alongside the outside of the others, which were still reserved for gas-powered vehicles. When he reached the top of the shoulder, Jerry could see that the CAV lane was still operating. A short line of CAVs, possibly a dozen in number, were heading toward him from the north, likely on their way to the airport. Jerry didn't understand why the lane was still open, as he doubted that heading to the airport in a private CAV while a riot was in progress nearby would have been a smart move for anyone, especially since only the wealthiest of the wealthy have their own automated vehicles, the rest being owned by taxi services that protected their investments by programming them to avoid operating any conditions that might cause them damage. He watched as several of the private CAVs drove past as he moved to the guardrail next to the emergency lane. A few of them slowed down, giving their passengers more time to gawk at what was happening in the other lanes. Yeah, Timmy, Jerry thought to himself. On the way to the Bahamas, we saw all these poor people fighting on the highway for some strange reason. It turned out to be the most exciting part of the trip. Without his omniglass, he wouldn't have been able to make out the majority of the protesters. With it, he was able to see multiple layers of them. Its weak artificial intelligence instantly connecting to the OmniWeb database, where it was capable of comparing and identifying each and every object that was in his field of view, right down to every bolt in a car or each visible stone on the side of the road, depending on the amount of detail he wanted to see. For the time being, he'd changed the settings to identify only those objects he needed to be aware of in a riot. As such, the OmniGlass was able to identify a variety of weapons and other things commonly used in violent situations, as well as a few more common objects like beer bottles and large rocks. These were outlined in yellow when they were identified as being in a person's hands or flying through the air. The aspect of the AI that he would need most on that day, though, was the custom-made search engine that quickly allowed him to identify and catalog human faces without governmental interference or permission. He climbed over the guardrail as another CAV traveled within a few feet from his position down the highway at full speed. His omniglass attempted to make out the shapes of the people within through its tinted windows. Just as he thought, most people in the CAVs were looking at the fires, while others simply appeared to be doing mundane activities like reviewing documents, talking to others, or sleeping. He waited for the next small break in traffic, enough for him to step out into the lane. As soon as he did, the very next vehicle quickly and smoothly slowed to a complete stop, finishing the maneuver within inches of him. The darkened windows concealed the people inside, but his glasses showed the outline of at least two surprised passengers who moved suddenly, reacting to the CAV's sudden decrease in speed. The CAV he'd stopped was definitely owned by a private party. It was black and sleek and had an elaborate silver grille on the front, reminding him of old Cadillac SUVs. Other CAVs immediately began to slow down and stop behind it, fast creating a line of 20 or so vehicles before he could reach the other side. He raised his hand to block his face so that it would not be seen or recorded by any onboard cameras. A calm robotic male voice originating from the vehicle began to speak. Jaywalking in a CAV lane can result in a $500 fine and even jail time. Please remove yourself from the roadway. He changed his flat hand into another well-known shape as he passed, without looking at the CAV as he did so. As soon as he was out of the way, the autonomous cars quietly started moving again, continuing along their predetermined route. Without looking back, he crossed the grassy median and vaulted over a low line of concrete barriers that ran along the side of the regular southbound lanes of the highway. Picking up his pace, he kept his eyes on the northbound lanes, occasionally looking south to see if the protesters he was planning to conceal himself within had started to advance. It appeared as if some of them had already begun to press through the smoke that was still billowing out of several of the burning vehicles they themselves had set fire to before sunrise. Most of these were old steel or fiberglass jalopies that still used fossil fuels to run before new government regulations essentially made them useless. He crossed the smaller medium between the south and northbound lanes and saw an opportunity to enter the fray at a spot where there was a lot of smoke that could shield him from detection. Deciding to take it, he took a deep breath and ran headlong into the smoldering fumes, quickly blending into the crowd of protesters. Once among their ranks, he took off his backpack again, and from it took out a folded tire iron. He pressed a button on its side, unfolding it, and locked it into its extended position. That's when he caught the attention of two DSR members standing nearby. They, after looking down at the two words bluntly displayed on his shirt, lifted their thumbs and nodded in approval. They were wearing plain white surgical masks and what looked like old hockey pads on their knees and elbows over their clothes, sections of much larger pieces of defensive gear that had been torn off and reassembled, something more practical. He walked through the smoke toward them. As he approached, Jerry noticed that one of them had a feminine shape and that they were holding hands with one another. When he was within 5 feet of their position, the AI in his omniglass began comparing what it could see of their facial oddities and non-symmetrical attributes with known identities that were listed on a variety of social networking sites and several lesser-known government databases, even though they were partially covered by handkerchiefs. Doing this wasn't legal, of course. In fact, it was quite dangerous, requiring a series of illegal hacks he collected or bought over the last 2 years, specifically designed to locate and mess with highly protected servers in such a way that they were tricked into operating as if the hack infiltrating their systems was either just another update or a check disk routine. If he were arrested while using the software in a public area, it could land him in jail for several years, but since the hacks were made only to collect photographs and videos, he figured it was unlikely that anything too bad would happen to him, even if he were caught. At least he hoped that was the case. "Where do you want me?" He walked over to the couple, acting as if he had met them before. "Looks like you could break some shields with that thing," the woman said by her voice. Jerry could tell that she was both young and nervous. Almost as soon as she spoke, the AI in his omniglass lens found a match from a list it had already compiled by her body type, estimated size and shape of her upper facial features, their general location just south of Seattle, and an estimation of how far someone with her appearance and behavior would be willing to travel to go to a riot. Another small pop-up window appeared in his vision, this one showing him what she looked like when she wasn't hiding behind a mask. It notified him that her name was Ellen Margaret Stapleton, a 22-year-old university student from the Seattle area. The guy was probably her boyfriend, and they were both most likely there to prove to themselves that they cared for the little people, or so they could brag to their friends about how they had participated. "Is the big guy up there in front or organizing everything from the back?" he asked them. He'd been down this road before. These kids weren't experienced, but as they were clearly associated with an influential group being college students, there was a good chance that they had been close to one of the ringleaders earlier that day and might know where he or she was. "Tammy is in the back with the support group," the boy said. "I think Aaron and Chavez are somewhere near the front of the crowd, throwing Molotovs." The AI gave Jerry two possible identities for the young man in its final analysis of his voice, just as he'd suspected. Both were university students, only one of which was listed as being single. But Jerry's mind wasn't on the information being presented to him about these two. It had already moved on to bigger and more important things. "Tammy Shelton," he said. He had heard of her before. She ran for mayor of Seattle in the last election for the Communist Party. "Yeah, wait, who are you?" James, ardent, Jerry said, without missing a beat. I'm with the anarchists. I worked with Tammy a couple months ago. Oh, the boy said, sounding unsure of himself, even though the handkerchief on the kid's face, even through the handkerchief on the kid's face, Jerry could tell he wasn't buying it. Time to break some shields, Jerry said, and ran north in the direction of the amassing crowd. Did you get that? He said. I got it, the voice in his head responded. It would be better to have actual live video confirmation that Tammy Shelton is there herself, but I'm not sure they'll have the time. We need to get you out of there before you get arrested for threatening police with a weapon. Seriously, why did you bring that? It served its purpose. He folded the tire iron and threw it under one of the burning cars. Now I just have to find Aaron and this guy Chavez. Any idea who they might be? Aaron maybe Aaron Fournier, a homeless advocate from L.A. You know, that guy who started the riots there after the quake. The one that forced the state to provide shelter and food for the homeless survivors long term. I know him, he said. Nothing for any Chavez. It could be an alias. Wait, don't turn around. Someone is talking to that couple. They might have seen you get rid of your tire iron. Damn, thought that was that smoke was too thick. Sending you a visual. You see him? Yet another window appeared in his glasses. It showed the bird's eye view of the area. He saw himself from above, through a break in the smoke in front of the others. Not far behind him, someone was running in his direction, waving what looked like a heavy chain above their head. Oh, you guys are paying me extra for this, Jerry said. He waited until the aggressor was close enough to hit, ducked as the assailant swung the heavy chain over his head, turned around and kicked the man in his left knee, making him fall to the ground in agony. Then he clenched his fists as tightly as he could and punched the aggressor with a hard left hook. The sad excuse for an insurgent's head hit the pavement, and he was down for the count. Gee, that was easier than I thought it would be. Must have been another overzealous teenager. Jerry kicked the body of his attacker over to look at the red surgical took the red surgical mask off of his face so that he could take a better look at him. Beneath the bandana was a soft face of a kid who couldn't have been more than 16 or 17 years old. He had long dark hair and smooth features and was wearing a black t-shirt that briefly caught Jerry's attention. Printed on the front of in white was an artistically interpreted outline and features of some mid-20th century celebrity that Jerry couldn't quite pin down in his memory. The man in the picture had a troubled look with squinting eyes and was wearing a leather jacket. He held a cigarette between two of his fingers in the closed fist of one hand and a bright blue pixelated sword in the other. Underneath the odd portrait and over a splash of red, large white letters were painted in a strange font that read Griefer. Great, a minor, Jerry thought. I'd better get out of here ASAP. So there you go. Take a look. Awesome. You're a badass, Jerry, the woman's voice returned. You ever do anything like that before? Nope, Jerry said. He kicked the chain under another burning vehicle and noticed that the unfortunate anarchist that had tried to take him down had a trash can lid strapped to his back that was rigged with two leather straps for handles. Jerry took the makeshift shield and ran through the heat and smoke toward the mounting sounds of the chaos that lay ahead. So I'm going to stop there. If you want to continue, that was page 30 in the book so far. And thank you for joining me tonight for this book reading. We're going to do another one from the second book soon. Again, that's Alley Cat's Teas on Facebook. And she goes by Disciple Alley on TikTok. And God is First with the number 1. Also on TikTok as God is First and godisfirst.com. So, of course, you can check out my book again at Amazon under my name, Michael S. Cordima, or just Michael Cordima. And, of course, the sequel is called The Angry Prophet. Sometimes people remember that better. Or at melchizedeknovel.com. God bless you all. Be a warrior, not a warrior. Have a good night.